Hello there, I'm John Peel and this is 10 of the best. I always had a soft spot for altered images when they were going. They came in for a lot of criticism, but I have to say that if I ever had like a crush on anybody who was in a band, it was on Claire Grogan, and so much so that in fact I allowed her to con me into singing on one of their records in a version of Song Sung Blue. Unfortunately, perhaps fortunately, we don't have a recording of that available, but nevertheless anything by Altered Images would suit me down to the ground. I was one of the last of the national servicemen. I don't like to talk about it, of course, and a lot of it's covered by the Official Secrets Act, so I can't tell you much, but 2355853 gunner Ravenscroft J I was in those days. And one of the things that I remember most about my military service was going with a gang of my mates to the Liverpool Empire to see Gene Vincent and Eddie Cochran, and this was about 4 days before Eddie Cochran died in a car accident, and it was one of the best gigs that I ever went to in all of my life. And Eddie Cochran was sensational. He started off, sounds like nothing today, of course, where you have like tons and tons of equipment, loads of effects and stuff like that. And you also feel that, like a Michael Jackson gig, if Michael didn't turn up, the gig could go ahead anyway. But there he started off with his back to the audience. Doesn't sound like much. And then when he played the first chord, he turned around, jumped through 180 degrees, and there he was, and it was just magical. I don't really have a father figure as such, or at least I didn't until a couple of weeks ago when I went to see Dicktyl playing in Islington, London, and I almost didn't go because I was in a sort of sulky mood, but I allowed myself to be persuaded, and it was one of the great gigs, because you know how normally people of that kind of vintage, because he's like 4 years older than I am, I think, and they normally just kind of run through the hits. Remember this good one? And they play a little bit of the hit rather faster than they did it originally. That's not the same at all. There's no feeling to it whatsoever. But Dick played a blinder. I mean, he really still cares about it, and he got stuck in, and I just went berserk, I have to admit. I went down to the front, I was covering everybody in beer and dancing, which is something I don't do very easily, and shouting at him in between numbers and things. It was just marvellous. Anything by Dicktyl, my newest hero, is just stupendous. This is 10 of the best, and I'm John Peel. Over the years, I've seen just about everybody you would want to see playing live somewhere. I've done gigs with lots of them. In fact, I've got a couple of posters of me, I think at Southampton University, billed above Pink Floyd, as it says like John Peel with Pink Floyd, and another one that says John Peel with Jimi Hendrix. Now, I did quite a few gigs with Hendrix and saw him play a lot of times, and I would still argue that he was like the greatest single performer that I ever saw, and particularly because it was there's such an element of tension in his performances, because he'd start to play something and you'd think, he's not going to get this sorted out, he's going to have to stop this and say, look, I'm awfully sorry, I've made a mess, can we start again? And then suddenly, miraculously, it'd be resolved, and you'd just be so, wow, thank goodness for that, and he'd be off on something else. A wonderful live performer, the best. In the early 1960s, I lived in Dallas, Texas, and I went to the Texas State Fair one summer, and they used to have those kind of booths and stages and things where people would come out, play a couple of numbers and say, if you want to hear more, there's more on the inside, and you'd have to pay your money and go in. And one of the performers I saw working under these circumstances was Roy Orbison, and I followed him from that moment on. I loved his records, I loved that kind of high voice. I like singing along with him in the car, as a great number of people of my age do. And I also like the fact that he was like a plain bloke, you know. It's one of those things where you're quite reassured that somebody who's like physically not hugely attractive can actually make it on some kind of level in showbiz. And one of the best gigs, that was about 3 or 4 years ago, I saw him playing live in Ipswich, and when I think one of the music papers phoned me up that Christmas and said, what was the best gig you saw this year? You're supposed to say something incredibly hip, you know, Sonic Youth somewhere or something like that. But in fact, I had to say Roy Orbison in Ipswich, always wonderful. They're quite nice, actually. William, Alexandra, Thomas and Florence, and every once in a while I corner one of them, usually in the car or something like this, and say, let me tell you about how things were when I was a boy. They go, come on, Dad, don't give us all of that again. But one of the things that I do try and tell them about is how impossible, well, how different life was before Elvis Presley came along. It's difficult to imagine this now, because quite clearly you listen to those early Presley records and they probably sound rather stupid to you. But prior to that, you'd been listening to things. I used to listen to a program called Three-Way Family Favourites in the hope of hearing like one decent record. And this was a kind of Forces Request program that came from Cyprus and London and Cologne, I think. And you'd listen to Glenn Miller records. It was all Glenn Miller records, and the Nuns Chorus from whatever it is that the Nuns Chorus comes from. But one week they played Heartbreak Hotel, and nothing was ever the same again. And that was followed up, of course, a couple of releases later by Don't Be Cruel. I could sing along with this, but I won't. John Peel, and this is 10 of the best. You can't imagine how boring music became in the 1970s. At the time, it didn't seem that boring. You thought new Led Zeppelin LP in November, maybe, and there's going to be a Roxy Music single in March, possibly. But, I mean, things were really pretty dull, and the only bands that got anywhere were bands which contained at least one member of a previously successful band. So there was really nothing outrageously new coming along. And I used to go to a record shop in Marble Arch, London, and the manager of the shop used to let me take records out on approval. One week I went in there, and there was this, and I just loved the record straight away from the sleeve, which was like monochrome, and just these terrible looking blokes standing there looking resentfully at the camera, in much the way that I'm doing now. And it was the first LP by the Ramones, and I took it back, and I was putting together a program to broadcast that night, and I changed the whole program around and put 3 or 4 tracks from this LP in straight away. And there was a great outcry straight away from people saying, we don't want to hear music like this, keep on playing those Grateful Dead records. And of course, whenever I get mail like that, it really excites me, so I want to be Sedated. People assume if you've got a job like mine that you meet loads of famous people and you're best pals with the stars and stuff. I think actually I've retained my sanity and my enthusiasm by not getting involved in these things at all. My favourite band of all time is The Fall, and I've met Mark E. Smith, the singer out of The Fall, a few times, and we never know what to say to each other. We just punch each other on the shoulder in a manly way and go our separate ways. And I was very, very pleased at a Reading Festival a couple of years ago that Thurston Moore out of Sonic Youth came and spoke to me, and I was playing the records and stuff like that and introducing the bands. Hello, this is, that kind of stuff. Not very much, trying to keep it to a minimum. I always found was the best thing. And he came over, he's about 9 foot tall, and sort of bent down and said, are you John Peel? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I am. So this is Sonic Youth. This is 10 of the best, and I'm music-loving John Peel. I know it's really pathetic to make lists of things, but I'm a compulsive list maker, and for the last however many years it is, 16, 17 years, when people have said to me, as they do, they say, what's your favourite record of all time, John? As though the answer is going to be something enormously interesting. I always say, the Undertones' Teenage Kicks, because there have been loads of great records since then, lots of great records before that, but I always think that this is the closest that anybody has ever come to making the perfect record. And the first time I heard it being played by somebody else, there was another DJ, Peter Powell, was playing it as I was driving to see Liverpool playing at home, and I was stuck in a traffic jam somewhere near Stoke-on-Trent, and it came on the radio, and I'm not ashamed to say that I burst into floods of tears, and I still get tears in the eyes every time I hear it, and I will now. Many years ago I used to work in San Bernardino, California for a radio station called KMEN, and we used to put on concerts in the Orange Palace or something in San Bernardino, and one of the best that we put on really featured the Byrds, who were profoundly unpleasant people. I didn't like them at all, and the Dillards, who was kind of fairly obscure but quite good, and Buffalo Springfield. And it was the first time that Buffalo Springfield had ever played a concert gig, and I was standing backstage with them talking, and spent most of the time talking to Neil Young. So when they came over to England the first time, I thought, I'll meet old Neil again, we'll have a bit of chat about old times and things like that. And he came round to my flat and didn't say a word, not a whole word the whole time he was there, and the record company bloke profoundly embarrassed. But nevertheless, despite this slap in the face, I still have a great deal of admiration for him, because even though he can make 2 or 3 rather boring records, the possibility still exists that the fourth can be terrific. And I think of the people of that age, apart from Dicktyl, he's about the only one who's still capable of doing music that's exciting and challenging and threatening even. And I like to think when he's playing those really sort of hard guitar solos that he does, that he has a sound in his head that he knows that is somewhere in that guitar, and he spends the gig trying to get the guitar to make that noise. And he certainly looks like that when he's playing, and it sounds like that, and I think that's really exciting. That kind of tension is wonderful. This has been my 10 of the best. I'm going to leave you with Neil Young, and this is Rockin' in the Free World.